And we will have closed the experiment in Zutphen before 4:15.
Voor de buitenlandse gasten hebben we die in ieder geval.
So at least we can share this with the foreign guests. And we hope that these simulations can help us to work on more case studies. And this one was great. Just before we started this experiment, we were absolutely convinced that this would be a conflagration, because we thought that there would be enough oxygen and there would be no smoldering. And we hadn't, thought of this window. That's what the student said as well. If the window breaks, there'll be conflagration. If not, you might be able to contain the fire. Can we go back a bit in the presentation? So this is what Bart said yesterday. He asked us to do a lot of experiments and gather a lot of practical information in order to feed into these models and to understand better what happens, scenarios perhaps that we had not envisaged beforehand. Thank you, Ruud, for your hard work. Are we still up for it? Yes, okay. Okay, so I'll go on for a bit. Because, and this is our focus in the Academy, is to research the best possible strategy in each square. As in Zutphen, you see that sometimes things happen that you had never envisaged. Of course, you want to restrict a fire, and there's a lot going on, and we're very successful. Very often we can extinguish a fire without it flashing over, but our strategy is the best ones. And we have 12 different ways to prevent a flashover, an extension of a fire. No one knows exactly which one is the best. I'm sure we'll look at that at some point in time. But also we focus on defensive actions outside. We've been looking at plumes a couple of years ago, and everybody in the fire service has said, what if we throw oil onto it, or petrol, or oxygen? The plume could perhaps even become cleaner or hotter, whatever. We tried all this, but not very successful, unfortunately. It was a lot more difficult to do this with the plume. The report is in English and in Dutch. It's available in both languages, can be downloaded. I'm not going to go into the details. All I can say is that we tried everything, but we're not very successful. That's a result as well. So we have a couple of these ideas that we had that turned out not to work. So what are we going to do? We're looking into the 12 different techniques. And this is what we've planned for next year. That's going to be quite a lot of work, because we have to design a setup. How are we going to measure it? Which technique, which strategy works best? So first of all, what we're going to do is see how much we know and how much experience we have, and we're doing this with the appropriate department in a workshop. So people who have experience with these activities will be there to gather experience. And we are also talking to the University of Delft about fundamental research, see whether we can do something with electrical fields or electromagnetic fields, about smoke, and etc. So this is very fundamental research, and it'll be years until we get the actual results. But the focus for now is very practical research, practical studies that of which we can use the results in the short term. But we also have to look ahead and see whether we can learn more. We focus very much on chemical interaction, but what about physical issues, electromagnetic fields and how it affects fire? We know very little about that. Defensive inside attack, also very difficult to measure in practice, so we're also going to start doing that next year. But first of all, we're going to find out how much knowledge there is, because it seems to be very novel. But I think each and every one of us have learned that you have to prevent a fire from expanding outside. How effective are we? And there are teams that are looking into these things and have some experience. So first we're going to look at that and then make a plan as to how to measure all this. This is quite a challenge. Focus. Offensive outside response. That's where most of the questions are about. And we've conducted a number of experiments. And by the way, when I'm talking about offensive outside, it's always like this. You know, this is an industrial premise, a business park, where you come up and you see smoke coming out from all sides. It's a sort of closed box. And we know now that it can be dangerous to open doors. We've learned that it's dangerous to go inside, and the distance you have to cover inside to find the fire is rather substantial. So what are we going to do? In practice, what you see is that people knock in the windows in order to get inside, but we've learned, from UL, that break the windows. If you do that, if you want the building to burn out more quickly, you want to do that. Perhaps better not to do that because there's subventilation. This is not what we want as a fire service. So we're looking for methods to be able to do something here. There are a number of techniques: fog nails, cold cutter, and the spray distribution nozzle. Wonderful. But there's also low pressure response, and these are new insights. Nowadays, we would say that this is a transitional attack or whatever. I don't know how you'd want to call it, but in any case, it would be a way to respond from the outside. Positive ventilation could also play a part. We started a couple of years ago, and this report is in Dutch and in English. It's an industrial building with one space, let's say one space, and we looked at what happened there. And you see that a response inside doesn't work as well as each and every one of these new technologies, the cold cutter, fog nail, and the sprinkler or the spray did very well in reducing the temperature in that room. But most industrial buildings don't have just like one space. They have a little restaurant or canteen at the back or an office. And what if the fire is over there? Can you still approach in the same way? And this is what we saw in the second series of experiments. This report is almost finished, but I'm just going to tell you a bit more about this report because it has led to some new information that has been quite enriching. In this case, we used 4 containers linked to each other, and the fire was in the farthest one. And the idea was you arrive with your truck and you enter in the front door. But that is not where the fire is. The fire is further down. So in this film, you can see what this looked like, and you can get an impression. This is what we call accident response 2. So this is where the fire was, and we tried to be realistic by adding some foam. So it was black smoke that we saw, perhaps not sufficient, but this is what we had thought of to make it realistic. And we also put in 2 victims because we wanted to know what the 2 techniques did, because you know what the goal is. The goal is to find out whether you can extinguish the fire from outside. If not, can we create a situation inside, making it safe for us to enter the building? And if there's nothing we can do, could we perhaps create a situation in which we can allow the victims to survive? And these are the techniques that we used. It was a very busy week with lots of experiments because we repeated each and every one of these experiments 5 times because we have to prove statistically that you can reproduce the results. So you need a minimum of 5 experiments to prove something. We didn't do that in CETFA because there you have a different case study. So this is a cold cutter. So this is the same way we worked with the fog nails and with the spray. Also for suppressive ventilation and making a hole at the back, because you always want an outflow opening here. And I think, yes, this is this fognel. Yeah. So in the first space, we had to have a replicable fire, and the temperature decreases the farther you get from the fire. Here in this space it was 150 degrees, in the second space 250 degrees, and the third one 350, and in the fire space varied between 600-700 degrees and 500 degrees, depending on the time. And by the way, in these experiments, and we didn't show you this one today, but we also looked at whether what we've seen here could be simulated. So we're using these data in order to explain after the fact what it is that we have seen. So we had to weigh what we burned a bit in order to determine the loss in mass, in order to determine how fast the propagation was. That's one of the questions. Did you conduct the experiments in a period in which the fire was at its highest point? Because if there's no fuel, the temperature will decline automatically. So we looked at that. The fire was still in a stage in which it was a full-fledged fire. I think we've seen enough. So this went on and on for a week, 6 times a day, sometimes even at night. And this is what I can show you. This is just one of the graphs. There are many more. I can't show you all of them. This is the temperature in the first space. So this is the space you enter. And you see what technique can do, or technology can do, with the temperature. And what strikes you is that tactical ventilation, the cold cutter, that these two provide an enormous temperature reduction in a short period of time, the greatest impact on the temperature in the first space. And that is more or less what we had expected. Fognels performed less well than we had expected, but you still see it, the orange line. You see that going on. And then the spray distribution nozzle wasn't very good. And then you see the hose lines, the high pressure and the low pressure hose lines. And that surprised us. Well, perhaps not surprised us, but these technologies in which you can apply smoke gas and then stop it, you see a decline of temperature and then an increase. And with these technologies, with smoke gas cooling, it's very evident, as long as the fire is not put out, you see a continuous production of gas. So if you don't continue to cool, you won't see the effect. You'll see this in a number of experiments. I'll show you another experiment later on. And I think that's very important to keep in mind. And this is something we, in any case, need to look at in terms of what this means for the way we are working. This is a graph, and here you see the different spaces, 1 through 4, and here you see the different techniques and what we did in the different rooms. So the previous one was what technique did in room 1, and here you see all 4 rooms with a response in, or action in, space 1. Then you see what happens in room 2. In room 2 you see the low pressure, the ventilation and cold cutter are effective. You see the temperature reduction, and then in room 3 you see that the cold cutter stops. So as long as you blast forward with the cold cutter, it won't go around the corner. So nothing happened in room 3. The tactical ventilation did work, did have a cooling effect. And then what we saw here, we hadn't expected that either, and we're looking for an explanation. The other techniques actually provide for a temperature increase in room 3. And how come? Well, there are all sorts of explanations. In room 4, none of the techniques actually had an evident impact. So the conclusion to be drawn is that this idea that with one technology that you use at some specific place in the building, if you don't know exactly where the fire is, chances are that you won't be impacting on the space where the fire is, which is a conclusion rather disappointing for me, because I always thought that you would have an impact, but no. So these are the main conclusions, and none of these technologies or techniques actually work in a complex space. But there's something that it says in the report we continue to conduct these experiments and moved on from one room to the next. So in the fire room itself, there was a big impact, and that would mean that we should not only look at the techniques that you use, but also in the reconnaissance. If you know where the fire is, we've known that for years. Of course, it's best to know where the fire is. So reconnaissance is very important. It's a good thing that you see this as a result and that we sort of shake up our know-how. So it could well be that we would have to do much more in terms of reconnaissance than in terms of techniques that we use. This is interesting. And you keep seeing this, that low pressure performs much better than high pressure in these situations. Are you leaving, Simco? Now I'm going to talk about you. Fire. Oh. So these are the main conclusions. Let me move on to offensive inside attack. We were not going to work very much on that, but there are a number of regions that asked questions about this. Last year we talked about this. We did a first study and we asked people what they did and how they dealt with this, and they said, okay, we spray in the smoke layer as they do with high pressure. Well, this report has been translated into English as well. It's been published a while ago. But is it a good technique? Manufacturers say, no, you haven't done that well. You should have done it better. And they made recommendations. So we decided we'd use other techniques as well. This report is almost finished. It will be published shortly. And there's just one thing that I would like to zoom in on. I'm not going to show you everything, but these are two graphs. And the colors are somewhat different. But the green line is a red line in the other graph. And the red line and the green line coincide. They're similar, and that's the low pressure. And in this one, you see a blue line, which is air pressurized foam, and there's a green line there. And with this foam, according to this method in which you spray like this onto the walls, that you can cool smoke gases much better. And something we're still discussing and we're exploring is how much water you use, whether you've used more or less water than in the past. Anyway, that'll be explained in the final report, but I wanted to show you that you can cool smoke gases as long as you do it as the manufacturer prescribes. Something else we did in Inside Attack, lots of people ask questions about this. What can you do? What can you do as a firefighter? Can you really explore? What can you do? What if you use thermoimaging? How much effort does that require? What is the reconnaissance that you can do? How much surface? This is a report that has been finalized now. We looked with firefighters what we can do. We're going to do reconnaissance in an unknown building. We measured all sorts of things, heart rate, sweating, air consumption, etc. Interesting things came out of this. We are not going to really focus on this report. It's the first step. We did this at ambient temperature. So if I give you all the ins and outs, you'll probably say, oh, no, that's it's nice, but we always work with heat. Nonetheless, we decided to do this at ambient temperature because this is a great way to measure the situation from zero, and then we can move on. So the report is available for those of you who are interested in it. Interesting experiments. Something else that we do with the University of Eindhoven, and Roy most probably talked about this morning, we're also working very hard on the sandwich panels. Of course, we said, okay, sandwich panels very dangerous. We've seen fires with strange explosions, and so we wanted to look into this. The University of Eindhoven thought it was very interesting. There'll be 2 students graduating tomorrow afternoon, and they looked at the behavior of sandwich panels, to which extent pyrolysis gases are emitted that could cause a smoke gas explosion independently, and also, looks at all the ins and outs, and they conducted experiments in order to determine the limits of the explosion, how much gas comes out of the panels, and then with simulation models, they looked at whether or not these are the only causes of the explosion. Very proud of this study. Then, well, actually, these are the 4 squares that I discussed, all the studies that we're conducting. And we also look at command and control. And this comes from Moerdijk, because there was a big fire in Moerdijk, and inspection said, well, fire services are doing whatever they want, and they are being taught what to do at the Fire Service Academy, but they never put it into practice. And so there were questions about the command structure, whether our commanding officers are not very good, that we have to improve our selection. Anyway, we're going to sort this all out, and we've been working on this for about a year. All the theories that apply to this have been put into a model. Now, this is the interesting thing, because in January, you might have seen this on Twitter, we're going to conduct 3 experiments. We need lots of firefighters for that. We're going to look at the effect of experience in freezing and freezing on decision making. Freezing means that in an unexpected situation, you can flight, flee, or freeze, and freeze can have a positive or negative effect. And that is what we're going to measure. And from January onwards, we hope to have 150 officers or chiefs on a plate here. We're going to show them scary things and see what kind of effect that has on them. We're going to do that with the University of Nijmegen. That's a great thing, and they are top specialists in the field of freezing. So once again, we're going to get a lot of know-how as to what we need to do. Second thing, we also thought maybe not all our command structures are appropriate for different incidents. So we came up with 3 scenarios, and we're going to test which command structure is the most appropriate for that scenario. We're going to do that. We have a selection process for that. And last but not least, we're going to look at the effect of mindfulness. This is the soft side, perhaps. Well, maybe a chief has to do a bit of mindfulness and take a deep breath in and exhale. This is what we're going to do this spring. Hope it's going to be interesting. This brings us back to Zutphen. And that means, well, I stuck to my time, did I not? I think and I hope that you have some idea of what we've been doing, what we are doing, and what we are going to do. And I hope we'll have an added value for you. If not, we'll be listening to you, to your feedback. We'll be sharing this know-how with everyone, and we're in constant touch with our partners, UL, about these things. So yes, well, that's it, more or less.
Dankjewel, Ricardo.
Thank you, Ricardo. Thank you, Ruud. Well, I'd like to give the audience the opportunity to ask some questions. Does anybody have a question, or are you so eager to start the reception? Inaudible question.
Ja.
Een vraag over de effectiviteit van de rookalarmen.
Question about the effectiveness of the smoke alarms. We included that in our analysis of the experiment in Zutphen. You'll need to wait till I analyze that, because I don't have information on that yet. Not because it's a secret, but just because I don't know.
Ja, nou nog een vraag?
Another question back there. Question is inaudible. Interpreter apologizes.
Ja.
Ik moet de vraag...
I have to repeat the question. It's about the offensive exterior attack, which is used for large industrial sites. But can you also use that in residential fires? Yes, that new knowledge that was recently disclosed intrigues us infinitely. We've taken measures to include a low pressure deployment from outside to inside. In the past, I would have said that's wrong, but now we know better. So we will take that on board in our ongoing dilemma. Take my word for it. Even yesterday, we had a heated debate about what type of building we would conduct such an experiment. We intended to do it in Zutphen until we saw how small that home was, because the greatest demand from practice, in my view, is what do I do with the building blocks? With residential fire, most firemen just enter and extinguish it. And you see a lot of videos on YouTube where people have already taken that UL course and go ahead and do that. So the decision is, am I going to do it in a small space, or will I take a larger building that's more challenging for my experiments? And it's an ongoing debate. You can't conduct all experiments simultaneously. It's very time consuming. And we've opted for an industrial site because we think that's where our coworkers need it the most. But as you say, it would be just as interesting to start by taking a look at homes, and we probably will do, but we'll prioritize it. So we still have a lot of work ahead of us for research, and we keep receiving new requests. Each time we face the dilemma of what can we do with the means available and what else do we want. And I'm sure we'll work all this out, but we can't give you all the answers yet. Very good. I have a question. I see that fire crew deployment and attacks and strategies are highly dynamic. So that this conference is about linking prevention with suppression. We've got a lot of building code regulations addressing this, and the fire departments assess this and find new ways to attack fires. Do you envisage a need for a link, and what should it comprise for dealing with structural matters and scrutinizing them? Well, I find that question very challenging, but I believe that prevention and suppression are very similar and are becoming increasingly interconnected. Okay, those other dudes know a lot more about it than I do, but in the progress in doctrine, we've seen preventive facilities and buildings that suppression should know far more about that, because you can benefit from them in determining deployment. And you need to have a fire-resistant partition, otherwise you can't block the fire. You also have to know how long an outer facade will remain in place, and you have to know when it's on the verge of collapse, because that's a decision you face when you enter premises, and you have to know whether you have a fire-resistant wall and how long it can withstand the fire. So these considerations all come into play. It's known that if it were up to the fire department, if we were in charge, then of course our preventive requirements would be entirely different. Right, Fred? But unfortunately, the trend is the reverse, because the requirements are minimal, and that presents major challenges for us. You hit the nail on the head. I'd like to get this off my chest. Increasingly, I read that the fire department is imposing cuts. That's why they're not going to enter anymore, and that's why they simply let things burn to the ground, and that causes major damage. I'd like to clear up that misunderstanding. The preventive requirements are lower, so people have a choice, and that raises important questions. How far do you want to go in taking risks to save a building if you know that at the front end they've decided that they'll meet only the minimal requirements? In a preventive sense, we're going to advise people to do more than is minimally required. We need to substantiate that, so we use this knowledge to enhance our own knowledge leverage to advise people better. Conversely, you can't simply say, we'll let it all burn to a cinder, and that's why we're looking for new techniques to equip our suppression services. I think that's the answer to your question. Absolutely. I'd like to add one comment. you rightly said these are minimal preventive requirements in our building code, but that's good because you have to understand that the preventive facilities don't target preserving the building, but safety of persons. And if you want more, then you need to take additional preventive measures. Everything you do as a fire department is for your account. Then you've saved that part. I think that's a wonderful wrap-up. Pay the fire department based on the residual value of whatever has not burned down in the building. That would be wonderful. Then we could conduct further research. Great. Thank you all very much.
Ja, nou, ik vind het...
This has been a fascinating day. This morning I was a bit blunt when I said, well, can repression coincide with science? Because it doesn't give you time to conduct thorough analyses, but nothing could be further from the truth because there's a lot of development in suppression tactics and people are thinking a lot about strategy and technique and training. And we've seen it all today. And what I think is really wonderful about this conference is the perfect balance of prevention and suppression. Yesterday they were focusing on prevention, today they're focusing on suppression, but the two keep converging. And I think that's what ties it all together because we're all trying to improve fire safety from our own discipline, but I think that what lies ahead is that prevention and suppression will increasingly coexist, and that Ricardo, who clearly agree with me, I agree with Ricardo, that matters a lot. It's been a great day, and I certainly think that suppression merits consideration at this Fire Safety and Science Congress, and I warmly recommend that the organizers feature suppression prominently on the agenda next year. I'd like to thank the IFV and the UL for this spotless, impeccable organization of the event. Until recently, I understand that this auditorium was flooded. It's been entirely renovated, and the paint wasn't even dry yet when you parked in the lot. I don't think you noticed a thing. That's great. And everything worked perfectly, including modern techniques such as streaming. Thank you very, very much for listening so attentively and for asking questions and engaging in debate with the speakers. And I hope and feel that this has been a very interesting and enriching day. I'd like to wrap up on that note. And now it's time for some refreshments and drinks. Thank you very much.